from a financial, from a human perspective with the volatility? You mentioned you could have gotten it for a nickel and the risk was great. Where's the risk today? What's your sense?
We're 13 years into this entire activity. I think the risk has never been lower. If you look at all the risks, right? The risks in the early years is the engineering protocol proper? Like 1 megabyte block size, 10-minute clock frequency, cryptography is first, will it be hacked or will it crash? 730,000 blocks and it hasn't crashed. Will it be hacked? Hasn't been hacked. But, it's a Lindy thing, right? You wait 13 years to see if it'll be hacked. But on the other hand, with $1 billion, it's not as interesting a target as it is with 100 billion. And when it gets to be worth $1 trillion, then it's a bigger target. So the risk has been bleeding off over time as the network monetized. I think the second question is, will it be banned? You couldn't know. It literally could have been banned at any time, many times early on. In fact, in 2013, I tweeted on the subject. I thought it would be banned. I made a very infamous tweet. I thought it was going to be banned. In 2014, the IRS designated it as property and gave it property tax treatment. Okay, so they could have given it a tax treatment where you had to pay tax on the unrealized capital gains every year, and it probably would have crushed it to death, right? So it could have been in any number of places banned by a government, but in fact it was legitimized as property. And then the question is, would it be hacked or would it be copied? Will it be something better than that? And it was copied 15,000 times. And you know the story of all those. And they either diverged to be something totally different and not comparable, or someone trying to copy a non-sovereign bearer instrument store of value found that their networks crashed to be 1% of what Bitcoin is. So now we're sitting at a point where all those risks are out of the way. I would say that year one of institutional adoption is it started August 2020. That's when MicroStrategy bought $250 million worth of Bitcoin, and we put that out on the wire. We were the first publicly traded company to actually buy Bitcoin. I don't think you could have found a $5 million purchase from a public company before we did that. So that was kind of like a gun going off. And then in the next 12 months, Tesla bought Bitcoin, Square bought Bitcoin. And I'd say now we're in year two of institutional adoption. And there are about 24 publicly traded Bitcoin miners by the end of this quarter. So you're looking at 36 publicly traded companies, and you've got 50, at least in the range of $50 billion on the balance of Bitcoin on the balance sheet of publicly traded companies, and hundreds of billions of dollars of market cap of Bitcoin exposed companies. So I would say the asset, decade one was entrepreneurial, experimental. Decade two is a rotation from entrepreneurs to institutions and is becoming institutionalized. So maybe decade one, you go from 0 to $1 trillion, and in decade two, you go from 1 trillion to 100 trillion.
What about governments? Government adoption, you said institutional adoption. Are governments important in this? Maybe making it, some governments incorporating it into as a currency into their banks, all that kind of stuff. Is that important? And if it is, when will it happen?
It's not essential for the success of the asset class, but I think it's inevitable in various degrees over time. But the most likely thing to happen next is large acquisitions by institutional investors of Bitcoin as a digital gold, where they're just swapping out gold for digital gold and thinking of it like that. And the government entities most likely to be involved with that would be sovereign wealth funds. If you look at all the sovereign wealth funds that are holding big tech stock, equities, the Swiss, the Norwegians, the Middle Easterners, if you can hold big tech, then holding digital gold would be, not far removed from that. That's a non-controversial adoption. I think there are opportunities for governments that are much more profound, right? If a government started to adopt Bitcoin as a treasury reserve asset, that's much bigger than just an asset investment. That's 100x bigger. And you could imagine that's like $1 trillion opportunity. Like any government that wanted to adopt it as a treasury reserve asset would probably generate trillions of dollars, $1 trillion or more of value. And then, the thing that people think about is, well, will oil ever be priced in Bitcoin or any other export commodity? I think there's like $1.8 trillion or more of export commodities in the world, and right now they're all priced in dollars. I think that this is a colorful thing, but it's not really that relevant. Like you could sell all that stuff in dollars. The relevant decision that any institution makes, whether they're a nonprofit, a university, a corporation, or a government, is what's your treasury reserve asset? And if your treasury reserve asset is the peso, and if the peso is losing 20% or 30% of its value a year, then your balance sheet is collapsing within 5 years. And if the treasury reserve asset is dollars and currency derivatives and U.S. treasuries, then you're getting your right now it's probably 15% or more monetary inflation. We're running double the historic average. You could argue triple, somewhere between double and triple, depending upon what your metric is. So, do I think it'll happen? I think that they're conservative, but they have to be shocked. And I think there is a shock. The late Russian sanctions are a big shock. That when the West sees $300 billion worth of Russian gold and currency derivatives, I think it, you got the famous quote by Putin that, we have to rethink our treasury strategies, and that pushes everybody toward a commodity strategy. What commodities do I want to hold? I think that's got a lot of people thinking. I think it's got the Chinese thinking. Everybody wants to be the reserve currency, right? So if I buy $50 billion worth of dollars every year, then I buy 500 billion over a decade, and I probably pay $250 billion of inflation cost on the backs of my citizens in a decade. So
inflation could be one of the sources of shock. And you wonder if there is a switch to Bitcoin, whether it will be a bang or a whimper. Like, what is the nature of the shock, of the transition?
I think that the year 2022 is pretty catalytic for digital assets in general, and for Bitcoin in particular. The Canadian trucker crisis, I think, educated hundreds of millions of people and made them start questioning their property rights and their banks. I think the Ukraine war was a second shock, but I think that the Russian sanctions was a third shock.
Yeah.
I think all three of them, and I think hyperinflation in the rest of the world is a fourth shock, and then persistent inflation in the U.S. is a fifth shock. So I think it's a perfect storm. And if you put all these events together, what do they signify? They signify the rational conclusion for any person thinking about this is, I'm not sure if I can trust my property. I don't know if I have property rights. I don't know if I can trust the bank. And if I'm politically at odds with the leader of my own country, I'm going to lose my property. And if I'm politically at odds with the owner of another country, I'm still going to lose my property. And when push comes to shove, the banks will freeze my assets and seize them. And I think that that is playing out in front of everybody in the world, such that your logical response would be, I'm going to convert my weak currency to a strong currency. Like I'll convert my peso and lira to the dollar. I'm going to convert my weak property to strong property. I'm going to sell my building downtown Moscow, and I'd rather own a building in New York City. I'd rather own in a powerful nation than than be stuck with a building in Nigeria or a building in Argentina or whatever. So I'm going to sell my weak properties to buy strong properties. I'm going to convert my physical assets to digital assets. I'd rather own a digital building than own a physical building. Because if I had $1 billion building in Moscow, who can I rent that to? But if I have $1 billion digital building, I can rent it to anybody in any city in the world, anybody with money, and the maintenance cost is almost nothing, and I can hold it for 100 years. Okay, so it's an indestructible building. And then finally, I want to move from having my assets in a bank with a counterparty to self-custody assets, right? So, and this is not, it's not just Ukraine, but this is like the story in Turkey, Lebanon, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, South America. You don't really want to be sitting with $10 million in a bank in Istanbul. The bank's going to freeze your money, convert it to lira, devalue the lira, and then feed it back to you over 17 years, right?
So self-custody assets would be layer one Bitcoin.
Self-custody assets, it's like if I got my own hardware wallet and I've either got your highest form of self-custody would be Bitcoin on your own hardware wallet or Bitcoin in your own self-custody. And the other thing people think about is, how do I get crypto dollars like Tether, like some stable coin?
Yeah.
Like, I'd rather, if you had a choice, would you rather have your money in a bank in a war zone in dollars, or have your money in a stable coin on your mobile phone in dollars? Right? I mean, you take the latter risk rather than the former risk.
In a war zone, definitely, yeah.
And you can see that happening. Like, we've gone from 5 billion in stable coins to 200 billion in the last 24 months.
Yeah.
So I do think there's massive demand for crypto dollars in the form of a US dollar asset. And everybody in the world would say, yeah, I want that. Well, unless you're just an extreme patriot. But most people in the world would say, I want that. And then a lesser group of people would say, I think I want to be able to carry my property in the palm of my hand, so I have self-custody of it.